We are here to further discuss a foreign affair. Someone seeing the title might think that had to do with a love affair, but of course it has to do with people who have the destiny, the karma, the life experience, you might say, of changing their religion, not just changing their religion, but changing it to a religion foreign to the culture or country with which they grew up, right? But also, we're going to look at some charts where there's just been a religious change, not necessarily one that is so foreign, right? Now, of course, what was one of the things that was brought out in the article that can give this kind of result that we saw over and over again?
Jupiter connected to the Rahu Ketu axis, particularly Ketu, I think.
Well, that certainly seemed to be true in the examples that I showed, but I think generally if Jupiter's under the influence of the Rahu-Ketu axis, there's the potential for this. Doesn't mean that's going to invariably be the case. And, I was showing how this connection between Jupiter and Rahu can come out in different ways. Conjunction, I believe totally invalid is the aspect, right? And even in one case where there was a Sukma Parivartana Yoga between Jupiter and Rahu. And we're going to see, potentially even just Jupiter in Rahu's nakshatra can create this kind of connection, right? So what other sort of things was I showing that potentially could give this kind of result? Some other predictive parameter.
Ninth lord connected with the eighth lord,
So yes, well, eighth house has to do with major change, with transformation. And then I believe that I saw some examples, and I think it's going to be true that the potential for religious change comes about when the ninth lord falls in the eighth. I think even just Jupiter in the eighth house as Karaka could potentially give this. What else?
or ninth lord in 12th, like, or relation with the 12th house or lord.
9-12 relationships, right? 12th
Yeah.
house of foreign countries, ninth house of religion, some sort of connection this way. Ninth lord in the 12th lord in the ninth, them combined seems to be able to give this kind of result as well. So these are some of the things that we looked at. Now, I in my email that I sent out giving the Zoom link, I mentioned that if anyone in the Sangha here, anyone in the group had this kind of experience in their own life, if they'd be willing to share their birth data and give us some timing around that. And I was happy to see that 4 individuals gave me their information this way. And that's what we're going to look at first, right? But then I have some additional sort of, public figure type examples that I want to look at as well. So without further ado, let me share screen here. And people can let me know when they see a chart. You should be seeing it now, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, because I'd never actually seen these charts before, at least I hadn't looked at them from this angle, this rather amounts to what K. Rao would refer to as blind testing. He would lay out some predictive principles and show some examples of this, and then ask people in the audience who'd had this experience to share their data, and we would look at that, and then, did the predictive parameters fit or not? Or did something else showing this kind of result? So as you see this chart here, immediately what should strike you this way?
Ninth Lord Sun in the ascendant with the Rahu Ketu axis.
Exactly. So we have the sun here, ninth lord for Sagittarius. And again, it won't invariably be the case, but I've, seen repeated instances, Swami Vivekananda's chart being an example, that for Sagittarius, when the ninth lord goes to the first, it can incline one to just be interested and be a religious person, just that alone. Of course, if there's additional good influences this way, that's going to enhance that. So we have the sun here as the ninth lord under the influence of the Rahu Ketu axis. And I didn't bring this out so much in the article, but we all know that trends in a person's life can show up from alternative lagnas, not just the birth lagna. Of course, Chandra lagna being among those. And so what's happening here also from Chandra lagna?
Mercury becomes the ninth lord and it's under Rahu Ketu axis.
Mercury now becomes the ninth lord, and of course, it's also under the influence of the Rahu Ketu axis. Now, what would be considered somewhat special about these nodes?
They're strong because they are in their Mool
Vargotama.
Trikona sign.
And what else?
Mool Trikona sign.
But what else besides Mool?
Vargotama.
Vargotama.
Yeah. They are both in their Mula Trikona sign and Vargotama. So if you look down at the Dasha sequence, you can see that starting as a teenager, age 14, this person ran their Rahu major period. And of course, whose nakshatra is Rahu in?
Jupiter.
And who does he get the aspect of?
Jupiter.
Jupiter.
And if you take Rahu's 5 and 9 aspect, which I do, then you would also see that not only is the ninth lord under the influence of the Rahu Ketu axis, but Jupiter, Karaka, is also under the influence of Rahu. And in fact, whose nakshatra is Jupiter in?
Rahu. This is a nakshatra exchange.
You see the Sukshma Parivartana Yoga. Now, this woman has a very interesting history with respect to religion, and she shared, a good amount of details about this. So I'm going to stop share screen. I'm going to bring up my document that gives this. Tell me when people are now seeing a document.
Yes.
So just follow along with me here. She says, I was born into a family of atheists, but at the age of 14, my dad decided to baptize me. Now remember, this is when she just moved into Rahu. So I became an Orthodox Christian. She was born in the USSR. However, I did not practice this religion and never considered myself a Christian. At age 20, I went to South Korea. Again, this was in Rahu, foreign experience in the 7th house, in a mutual glance with the ninth lord. So she goes to study in a foreign country, where I studied as an exchange student at a Protestant university. My Sundays were spent in church, singing worship songs and studying the Bible with a pastor. After about 2 years, I still did not consider myself a Protestant. During my time in Korea, I also learned about Buddhism. And after I graduated from the university, I began studying it deeply. I read Buddhist literature, practiced meditation, read mantras, visited many Buddhist temples. However, this religion also didn't become a part of my life. So now she's been involved in 3 different religious traditions here, but doesn't, adapt them as being necessarily her religion. Buddhism motivated me to explore all the religions of the East. I read books on Taoism, on Advaita Hinduism, and I also practiced Osho's dynamic meditation, loved his books and teachings very much. I think I should mention my interest in esotericism. Towards the end of the Rahu period, I married a Muslim and converted to Islam. Now, 15 years after converting to Islam, I can say that even though I deeply respect this religion, I do not identify fully with it. I partially practice it, but at the same time, I'm actively involved in studying Vedic astrology, which I find fascinating. Important to mention that I do not identify with the ideologies of Hinduism stands for. At this stage in my life, I consider myself a deeply spiritual person. So this woman has been what you would say a religionist, right? She's been interested in religion and has not necessarily identified with anyone in particular, but has certainly, studied foreign vidyas very deeply for a good portion of her life. This was all happening in Rahu with this nakshatra exchange with Karaka Jupiter, but also influencing both the 9th house from the sun, 9th house from Mercury. So this is actually just quite an outstanding example of the kind of things this article was all about. Now, where's the indication that this person would marry a foreigner from a different religion who was older?
Rahu in 7th house and aspect of Saturn on the 7th house.
Correct. Of course, Rahu in the 7th, it can mean that, it can mean a lot of different things. When I say a person is marry someone who's quite from a different background from them, that can be of a different race, of a different religion, as in this case. They can be from a different culture, different social economic group. It can express itself in a variety of different ways. Here it was someone who was from a distinctly different background, culture, and from a different religion. And as we saw in some of the examples in the article, oftentimes a person converts to a different religion as a result of someone they're marrying right, who has that particular religious faith. But then she says, even though she respects it, she's not really, and does some of the practices, she doesn't really identify herself as being Muslim. Quite interesting. You know, what, Bullock, raise your hand.
Mark,
Yes.
can we say that because the ninth lord is with Ketu, there's some discontent with every religion in the sense nothing sticks? Had it been Sun with Rahu, probably the result would have been different.
Is that because K2 is a planet of detachment? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Interesting to be the case, but you know, we saw instances in the article where Jupiter was jumped K2 and a person converted to religion and then just stayed with it. So I'm not sure I would say that.
Got it.
Interesting idea, but I wouldn't say so.
Well, can I add something to that?
Please, Peter.
I think with K2, I think the the attraction, if that's the right word, would be to religions or spiritual practices that emphasize this idea of detachment and disconnection. And so maybe the ones who have that K2 influence are the ones who stayed with that kind of religion rather than something like Islam, which doesn't necessarily teach that, for example.
You know, that's an interesting observation, Peter, because, you know, in the yogic tradition, which of course is a part of subset of the Sanatana Dharma, you have this idea of the development of yogic vairagya, right? Which is, you know, a kind of detachment, right? That comes about by not just pretending to be detached, but as a result of, you know, inner experience that then, you know, makes you feel less detached from external experience. So that's an interesting observation. You know, what also struck me looking at this chart, when do Rahu and Ketu give some of their best, or are capable of giving some of their best results? What do the Sanskrit classics tell us about that? Hmm?
When they give Raja Yogas,
Well,
or
when I say best, you know, that's a specific sort of result. I'm just talking about generally positive results as opposed to, you know,
when they're
In
the
benefic
sign
signs,
of, benefic signs of Jupiter and Mercury, yes.
and
Mhm.
also getting the aspect of those planets.
Yeah.
So look at this Rahu in its Mula Trikona sign, Vargotama, getting the aspect of its own Lord Mercury and plus the aspect of Jupiter. So this is how Rahu won't necessarily be an affliction to the seventh house. In fact, she talks about the marriage being a good, stable marriage since this happened. What subperiod, what subperiods, I should say, in the Rahu would have been ones that you would identify that would bring about, you know, there's times when you meet your spouse and you become a couple, and then there's times when you actually marry, which can sometimes be quite a bit times after you originally become, you know, a sort of a, you might say, marriage-like situation. What subperiods would you identify here? Kind of looking at age-appropriate times when this thing typically happens.
Maybe
Mhm.
Rahu's son.
Very good, Shauna. He married in Rahu's son. Because remember, just before the marriage, she converted to Islam. You know, that you take some vows, you sign some papers, and you know the different process that's involved in converting and that. So, you know, Rahu's son would have both brought the conversion, given the son's lord of the ninth house, but then also brought the marriage. They're 1/7 from each other along the 1/7 axis of the birth chart. Now, is there any additional reason why the son could have brought such an experience?
In the ascendant
it's
of Vamsa,
D9.
in Vagna Vamsa, yeah.
You guys see it. And it's one of the reasons that, again, she's quite the religionist. The ninth lord's son in the birth chart has really good strength in Navamsha, being in the Lagna in its own sign, but also why the sun period as a sub period within Rahu could also be the one that brought the marriage. What sub period do you think she could have met her man who became the spouse and they started getting involved as a couple?
Rahu.
Rahu Venus.
Rahu Venus would be a good guess. Always a good guess. Didn't happen to be true in this case.
Rahu Mercury.
Correct, Pulak. there was 7 years between, when she first got involved with her person who became the husband and when they actually officially married. And of course, at age 22 to 24, kind of an age appropriate time, she ran Rahu Mercury, which could not be more obvious in terms of a period and subperiod in the birth chart that could give the marriage. So this was the first example that someone shared. Now I want to pull up another one.
So, Mark,
Yeah,
just one quick question.
Aditi.
Uh,
Vivek, go ahead, Vivek,
yeah.
and then Aditi.
So whether the same pattern will be continuing the D20 also?
Well,
That is for spirituality.
right, and so you're bringing in the ID20, which I did not bring into the article. The problem with D20 is, do you have an accurate enough birth time to give a correct D20 login? And this is always a bit of a question, given the imprecision of recorded birth times. But it's interesting to look at when this person sort of, well, it's throughout Rahu is when she was really, and then continuing on into Jupiter is when she was really exploring different religions, traditions, right? Never really fully adopting any one. And maybe you can look at the timing of the conversion, which was Rahu's son. But, I didn't. So is it relevant to be using D20 this way in terms of developments of persons in their spiritual life? Absolutely. Aditi, you had a comment or question?
Yes, Mark. Mars's aspect as the 12th Lord, on Sun as the 9th Lord, can that cause discontentment?
Well, it's an affliction to the ninth, right? So, yeah, potentially. It also creates it's not a mutual bond, but Mars as the 12th Lord aspecting onto the ninth house did bring about a 9-12 connection, which, as we saw, seemed to be able to also give this kind of result, adaptation of a foreign vidya.
Right. Yeah.
Anything else before we move on in this chart? All right. So let me pull up another one here that was sent to me. So in terms of the article and what it was all about and what was discussed in the article, the examples that were shown, what immediately strikes you about this?
Jupiter in 12th with Rahu.
Karaka Jupiter in the
Yeah.
12th, so closely conjunct Rahu, right? And anything else strike you this way?
9-12 connection.
Spell that out, Bula.
The 9th Lord Mars goes to the Lagna aspected by the 12th Lord Saturn.
Right. And this person, again, let me pull up the information that they shared. So again, this is of someone that is in the program, and actually they're participating today. And they said, I was just noticing the other day the connection between Jupiter and Rahu in my chart after reading your article. I note here there's also a close connection between the 9th Lord Mars and the 12th Lord Saturn. I had wondered why. I learned to meditate in my Saturn Rahu period, and this provides a clue. In my case, I was raised Christian in the United Church of Canada, but became non-observant around my 16th year. For about 6 years, so up to age 22, I was in a spiritual void. Then, after a period of seeking, I finally learned transcendental meditation, a technique coming from a foreign country. I would make clear that this was not a change in religion, but it was an adaptation of a technique used commonly in India to help me with worsening mental stress issues. As I found great benefit from my stress usage from the practice of TM, I did pursue more knowledge about the technique and the body knowledge that supported it, which of course is the Sanatana Dharma. I became a teacher of TM and I pursued deeper aspects of Vedic knowledge, including Jyotish, over many years. So coming back to the chart then. Well, they talked about having first learned the technique of transcendental meditation in their early 20s. This was Saturn Rahu, but then, look, then Saturn Jupiter, right? And then Mercury, which is also a part of this configuration in the 12th house, right? And a part of that combination of Rahu Jupiter. Now, this person is now in their sun period and have been running their sun period since 2021. So, what I know about this person, what we should all know about this person is that because they've been a part of the Jyotish journey and have taken other classes from me, they've been studying a foreign Vidya in terms of Jyotish during this time, during the sun period. May have started earlier, right? But why would the sun give this kind of result, this pretty strong interest and involvement in Jyotish? Why would the sun
I
go?
noticed that from Chandra Lagna, the sun is with the ninth lord in the fifth house, and with Rahu,
Who are the two planets of astrology?
Mercury and
Jupiter
Jupiter.
and Mercury.
And of course, the sun is there. Sun has a source of strength there. Does it?
Yes, it's Vargotam.
Bhagavad. And Peter pointed out that where do all these planets fall from the moon?
In the fifth.
In the fifth, right? So the fact that they're involved in the study of Jyotish during this time, is showing here by the connection of the sun with the two planets of astrology, but also the way in which all these planets fall in the fifth house of learning, of studying, of Vidya from the moon. So again, I'd never looked at I'd seen this chart before because the person had shared it previously, but I'd never looked at it from the standpoint of them getting involved in a foreign meditation practice that comes from the Indian spiritual tradition, and then as a result of that, studying different aspects of that tradition as well. Shauna, you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I noticed too that Sun is in Shatabhishak, which is Rahu's nakshatra. So would that additionally bring more foreign interest?
Well, I would say yes. The key thing here, just in terms of the predictive parameters, how strongly Rahu and Jupiter are connected here.
Mark?
Now, I want to say something about that because, the ancient text didn't have very nice things to say about Jupiter Rahu. It could say that one could be an enemy of religion, or one, and actually it does indicate that one could adapt of, something like Buddhism, move away from Hinduism, which was regarded as being a tragedy or something that was not very good or desirable at all. But in the modern day context, as I've talked about it, I've found that, just this combination of Rahu and Jupiter can mean this and not be a negative thing at all. So Shruti, I'll get you in a minute by saying, I think someone wanted to say something before that.
Mark, I had a question. This is my chart, I don't mind.
Okay, all right. They've
You'll
been
also
revealed.
know
They've been revealed. This is Angus's chart.
But when you speak about Sanatana Dharma, are you speaking of it as a religion?
Well, what is it? What does the words mean? It means the eternal truth. The eternal truth, right? And it depends on how you define religion, but it really, what's called Hinduism is more properly referred to as the Sanatana Dharma, meaning the religious tradition coming from India, whose roots are in what? In the Vedas, right? And in the main spiritual texts of the Sanatana Dharma, which would be things like the Bhagavad Gita. So, whether you call that, well, what would you call that? I would call it a spiritual tradition or a religion.
Spiritual, yeah. Spiritual tradition. Yeah,
You can
thank
just
you.
refer to it as a spiritual tradition if you don't, like the word religion. Sometimes the word religion has a very negative context.
Well, it's almost like we're always seeking, we're always, we're experimenting with spiritual knowledge and we're trying to find our
The
way
truth.
to the goal. Yeah, exactly. One other thing I'll mention about this chart is you'll notice the exchange between Mercury and Saturn, and there is a foreign wife involved here. My wife is from Mexico.
Ah, okay. Thank you for sharing. So he's saying, of course, the 12th Lord, or actually an exchange between 7 and 12, has brought a foreign spouse, and then in which case the additional influence of Rahu there just additionally supports that idea, right? Thank you for sharing. Shruti, then you had some comment or question?
Yes, I had that question, that if he has as a foreign wife or a husband, he or she. And next, my observation again here is there is a connection between 8th Lord Venus and the 9th Lord Mars, and they are in the first house, and it gets the aspect of 12th Lord Saturn. So again, it emphasizes the change of religion or beliefs, and also it emphasizes the interest in the occult science, like 8th Lord being with the 9th
Absolutely.
in the first. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, all what we hadn't really highlighted the 9-8 connection before, so I'm glad you brought that out, since that was something that was also mentioned that can support this kind of thing. All right, anything else?
Mark,
Yeah,
you had
Randy.
mentioned about some of the things that Rahu Jupiter could give,
Mhm.
and under the right conditions, could it go to the extreme of fanaticism?
Yes, it could. What really produces a Guru Chandal Yoga, as it's referred to, is when it happens in the sign of malefics and there's, they say, the additional aspect of Mars. In which case, it can give a lot of what the ancient texts say in a negative sort of way. K.N. Rao's Jyotish Guru, Bhaskaranandaji, seemed to really not like this combination at all. But again, in the modern day context, I have found that it can have, meanings that aren't negative at all, like the one we're talking about. So, yeah. Okay, anything else before we move on?
Mark, would this be a spiritualized Ketu? I'm
Well,
guessing.
what do we've talked about what spiritualizes Ketu, and the influence of Jupiter can do that, and what else? So Ketu being connected to the 5th house, the 5th Lord, the 9th house, the 9th Lord, being in moksha signs with the influence of Jupiter, being in moksha houses with the influences of benefics. I'm not sure that, the only thing that happens this way, but it is something, is again, Jupiter is very, very closely conjunct here, the Rahu Ketu axis. And so there's a very strong connection between Jupiter and Ketu that way, right? Now, remember, this unfolded for this person. Saturn has a major period, I think, what's going on. Do I have that right? Yeah. But it was in the sub-period of Rahu. And again, if you didn't sort of understand these things, and you're a new student at Jyotish, you could kind of sort of scratch your head as to why, this sort of period and sub-period would give this kind of result. Now, somebody brought up the idea of D20. Does that shed any additional light on it? And, what would you say here? I don't know that I would necessarily say it. And is this correct? Vimshamsha, that would highlight. Well, this person didn't, they started practicing a meditation technique, and they did it not in a non-religious sort of, they weren't attracted to it for like religious or necessarily spiritual purposes. They say they wanted to experience relief from stress, which was one of the ways in which the transcendental meditation technique was marketed here in the US, a technique for reducing stress, which it wasn't very effective at. I can attest to that myself, because we followed the same route here. We both started meditating, then we got interested in becoming teachers. We became teachers, and then we also then, through that, got interested in the philosophical background related to that. All right, anything else? All right, we're going to move on here. Case number 3.
Mark,
Yes.
sorry. So in this chart again, Karakansha Lagna is Gemini, right? So from that, in
Well, yeah, just hold on. Let me,
sure,
yeah, so Karakamsha, who's the Atmakaraka here? It's,
Moon.
is it
Moon is
Jupiter?
Atmakaraka, and it is fifth from the Karakansha Lagna, and Jupiter and Mercury is ninth from that Karakansha Lagna.
So from Karakamsha, like you're saying, those planets in Aquarius, including, this Jupiter Rahu conjunction, are all in the ninth from there.
Right.
Yeah, and from a static potential point of view, from the Jaimini perspective, that's relevant. I wasn't, in the article, I wasn't really sort of bringing out the Jaimini perspective, not to make this overly complicated, but obviously, if that static potentials exist, it should also be reflected in some way in the Jaimini system, right? Because there's only one reality, and if the reality is that the person made a religious conversion, that's going to be reflected in both cases. All right, so I'm bringing up the third example. And again, just based on the things we've talked about that can give this sort of thing, what strikes you?
Ninth house got the access of Rahu Ketu. First thing to see.
Yes. So K2 is in the ninth. Rahu Ketu axis is along the 3-9 axis, K2 specifically in the ninth. And what is K2's condition here?
Vargo to
Is
Moon.
Moon Trikona and Vargo.
Well, it's not Mulatrikona. Rahu is Mulatrikona in Gemini, but K2 would be, having good strength here. Now, remember what spiritualizes K2. And we see here it falling in the ninth. And then whose nakshatras did?
Jupiter.
Jupiter.
It's in
Jupiter.
Jupiter's nakshatra. And then Karaka Jupiter goes where?
Eighth house.
Eighth.
12 from the Ketu, yeah.
Right.
Right.
Well, just the fact that, we're looking at, does the ninth lord connect with the eighth house eighth lord, or does Jupiter Karaka connect to the eighth house eighth lord that can necessarily sort of bring this thing about, right? And this was one of those instances where the person underwent a conversion to Islam, having been, born in the West and so on, when they married. So let me just again pull up the document where I have the information. So the person indicated, I changed my religion from Christian to Muslim in order to marry my then fiance and move to the US. It's important to note that the change was in name only, as I do not practice Islam. I was even asked to choose a Muslim name, which I did but never use. The conversion occurred on November 22nd, 2017. So let's look at that. So it was a conversion that really wasn't a conversion, right?
Mark?
Okay, Peter, you can reveal yourself here.
Yeah. Okay, this is my chart. And I made a typo. It wasn't 2017, it was November 22nd, 2007. Just so we get the right
Well,
date.
thank you. November 22nd, 2007. So we're looking at Venus, right?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Of course,
Venus, Saturn specifically.
you're marrying in this period, right?
Yeah.
Which, of course, Venus can always give. Now, why a person might go under a religious conversion that's really not, but in name only, you might say, in order to marry. What strikes you? Aditi, you have a comment here.
You don't see his chart.
Oh, well, that would help, wouldn't it?
Thank you.
What are you seeing? If you're not
The
seeing-
article.
Oh,
Article.
okay. I see. Okay. Thank you for letting me know. All right, you see the chart now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So, what would people say about this? Because, besides the fact that, what's going on between Jupiter and Venus, number one?
exchange.
Yeah, there is an exchange.
Their
Yeah.
exchange, which Jupiter's not the ninth lord here, but of course it is Karaka. So, given the fact that, Jupiter is the Karaka in the eighth and it's in exchange with this Venus, and that this happened during the Venus major period, but it's not as he acknowledges, a true religious conversion. He's not really becoming, a devotee of Islam. He's doing it, related to the necessary, and in marrying and being able to then relocate to the U.S., right? Peter, you want, since you've talked about it, you want to say anything about this, or?
Well, basically, in order to come here, in order to actually marry my wife, it was necessary for me to convert to Islam because I believe in the Muslim religion, Muslim faith. A woman cannot marry outside of her religion, or it's frowned upon, shall we say. So it was a necessary thing that needed to be done.
Yes. And so I've seen this before. I've seen it happen. In fact, just recently in a marriage I predicted, that the same thing happened. The man had really no interest in converting to Islam, but he needed to go through the process in order to, so that the family wouldn't be so upset that their daughter was marrying a non-Muslim. In that case, right? So it was a, kind of a practical necessity, you might say, right?
Yes, definitely.
But yeah, Randall?
I noticed this chart and the last chart, Venus being exalted. And in the last chart, it was Venus exalted in the first with the log. And I'm wondering, is exaltation to be looked at as more of a spiritual value of that planet?
You know, under the right circumstance, yes, but just because a planet's exalted doesn't mean that it will incline a person towards spirituality or be special that way. Not in my experience. Now, in both of those cases, Pisces was the lagna of 4, Venus is the eighth lord, right? In this case, Libra lagna, Venus is the eighth lord. So, we have two individuals that have been very deeply involved in the study of Jyotish, being Jyotishis themselves in the case of Peter. And, a lot of this has happened in the Venus major period, has it not, Peter?
Yes, yes. The actual timing of it was Venus, Venus, Saturn, which I think is interesting in the D9, if you look at that.
Right. You have this, well, obviously both are strong, both in the birth chart and in the Vamsha. And what I like about these planets in terms of absorbing avidya and being a very good student, absorbing this knowledge at this time, see this combination from the moon, right? Now Venus is exalted fifth lord of vidya, and Saturn obviously, becomes the ninth lord exalted in the fifth.
Mm.
And Peter, was it in 2018 that you started we started being involved with learning together?
It was 2000 and let me think now. 2008 when I first picked up. It was the summer of 2008 when I first picked up a book on Jyotish, and 2016 when I first became a student with you.
So that was Jupiter and Venus, Jupiter followed by Venus, Saturn.
Yep.
Right. Gosh, Peter, we're going on our 10-year anniversary here.
Yeah, what are you going to buy me, Mark?
What do you want? What do you want? I like that answer. Very good. How about a copy of my book?
Always, yeah, that'd be great.
All
Mark,
right.
just one comment. The Dasha Lagna is also interesting in the sense that from Venus, the fourth lord goes to the 12th house, ruled by Saturn, and this thing happened in Venus, Venus, Saturn.
Right.
I just wanted to call that out.
No, good comment. This is good. All right. Anything else before we move on to case number 4 here? I remember who case number 4. I know who case number 4 is. All right. So this is not a case where a person made a conversion to a religion that was not a part of the culture or country that the person grew up in. And I'm going to, again, bring up my note here so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay. So the person starts out, a little cultural background of me. I grew up in a Jain family and followed Jainism. However, my neighbor was Hindu, and as a kid, I loved doing puja and other ceremonies with them. In Jainism, playing Holi, bursting of fireworks, or even doing puja of idols at home, apart from putting on divya, is prohibited. I started questioning all these things as a kid and used to follow all the Hindu traditions with my neighbor. I now represent myself as a Hindu and follow Hinduism. It is not a completely foreign culture for me, but very different from Jainism. And regarding foreign residence, since the past 8 years, I've been in the United States, not yet settled though. An amazing coincidence is that I have recently started learning Reiki and other healing practices which involve the study of other Asian religions. So that's the background. Let me bring up the chart again. And what do you observe here? Who's the ninth lord and where does it fall?
Jupiter, and it goes to the 12th.
Now, that's the case, but again, this is not so much an instance of a person adapting a religious tradition from a foreign country. Jainism is, has always been rooted in India. She was born in India, but she did then get involved in and make a change over to Hinduism. And, this was happening early on, right? She says about when she was a kid. So when was she a kid? She was born in Mercury. That would have been very early, up to age 4. More likely, this was going on in K2, right? And then following that was Venus, which of course is under the Rahu Ketu axis, but not necessarily connected to the ninth house, ninth lord from either the birth lagna or the moon. Right? And now currently in their sun period as of 2021. So this is a little different scenario, and we don't necessarily see, say, some of the predictive parameters that would indicate adoption of a foreign video. Again, this was happening in Venus. Whose nakshatra is Venus in?
The moon?
Sun.
Is it the moon?
Sun.
It's in the sun's nakshatra. Right? Not sure that really, provides any additional insight. Now, there is this, what's going on here between, Jupiter and Mercury? We have an exchange, right?
Yep.
And so is there an eighth lord and a mutual glance with Jupiter, the ninth lord?
Yes, Saturn is
Mark,
aspecting.
Yeah.
Mark, I feel,
Go ahead.
sorry, I feel Dasha Lagna may explain it from Venus.
Mhm.
So if you make Venus as the Lagna, the ninth lord becomes Mercury going to the 12th in the sign of Jupiter, and there's that exchange.
In this exchange, yeah. So again, this is not a case of adapting a foreign religion so much as it is a change of religion, which I would see Jupiter as Jupiter, but Jupiter also as the ninth lord in a pretty close mutual aspect with Saturn as the eighth lord as being something that would be more indicative of this. Shauna?
Also, Jupiter as the 9th lord is in Rahu's nakshatra.
Good, good. I had not noticed that, so I'm glad you brought that out. Again, if we look at the timing of this, it appears to have been happening in K2, potentially, right? She talks about being a kid. This took her up to age 11. And then, this was followed by Venus. Any other thoughts or observations about this one, Drew?
Mark, I wanted to raise this point about Venus. From Venus is the fifth lord from Dasha Lagna, and she was like doing kirtans and pujas. That could be a fifth house matter, but with Rahu, it could mean that something different from her.
That's I'll be interested. She does mention doing pujas and so forth, and um, what
Different from her culture, like kirtans
yeah,
and all.
what
So
Dhruv is
I was
pointing out,
looking at it from that point.
right? But certainly the use of mantras, which is usually involved in puja, and spiritual practices are more the fifth house. And religious rituals and like pujas, like yagas, and so on. What house and house lord would those more be pertaining to?
Ninth.
That's more ninth house indication, and then obviously Jupiter as Karaka. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
Anything else?
For mantras also, I think we are saying for the fifth house, right?
Mantra and spiritual practices in general are a reflection of the fifth house, fifth lord. Yes. The actual rituals are more of a ninth house, ninth lord Jupiter signification, is my understanding. Anything else?
Ketu is in the fifth from the moon, right? That is also one.
It is.
Yeah.
It is, and that is definitely relevant if she was. But again, it's not the ninth house from the moon. So, but then well, yeah, it's just not sure here.
Mark, there's also an interesting, there's a Kesari yoga there between the moon and Jupiter, with Jupiter ninth lord, moon the Lagna lord. So
Correct. I was just noticing that myself, Peter. Okay.
And D9 also, I think there is a combination of Jupiter, Ketu altogether.
Say it again.
But
Say
no,
it.
in D9 also there is a congestion of the Jupiter, Ketu.
Yes, there is. Jupiter's on the influence of the Rahu Ketu axis. And again, this is coming out in K2. So I do believe that's probably a relevant comment as well. So now these are the four cases that were presented to me by people who are in the program here. I'm going to look at some additional ones of just people I know additionally quickly here. This is someone who was born in born in America, grew up in a Christian Protestant faith or household, but who, as an adult, got very much into the Sanatana Dharma. He describes himself as an Advaita Vedanta person. Participated in the yoga satsanga that I did for a couple of decades actually, where we studied the Bhagavad Gita and other scriptures that come from the tradition of the Sanatana Dharma. And really, if you look at this chart, and I wondered about this myself because you have, of course, Jupiter as both the ninth lord and the 12th lord in the 12th house. Could that be a reflection of that? But one thing I didn't bring out in the article that I'm going to be showing here a bit is, we all know that tendencies in a person's life or experiences in a person's life can show up from alternative lagnas, particularly Chandra Lagna. And so from Chandra Lagna Sagittarius, what do we notice here in the ninth house?
Rahu Ketu axis.
K2 axis, particularly sort of K2. And when was this happening? I'm not sure much about the history prior to the Rahu major period, but I do know that since then, it was during this period that this man would be attending kirtan all the time, different sort of spiritual festivals, mostly again based on the yoga tradition. And then, as I mentioned, participation in my weekly yoga satsanga. So it was during this Rahu period that he was very, very involved in this sort of thing. Another example Well, before I leave this chart, I've used this chart to illustrate something that, when I first saw it, kind of struck me as being, why would this be the case? Some of you heard me mention that in Parashar in the chapter on the indications of the houses, one of the indications of the third house is death of parents. Why would the third house be related to the death of parents? Ekaterina?
Well, from the fourth house
Yes,
and eight.
12 from the fourth. 12 is loss from the fourth, like mother, and for the father, it will be a Maraka seventh
Maraka
house.
seventh. Yeah.
Yes.
That's correct. You can see that at a fairly young age, he ran his sun major period from age 26 to 32. Both his mother and his father passed during this time. Now, what else is going on with this sun that maybe could also contribute to that?
It gets the aspect of Saturn.
It's the very close aspect of Saturn. Right?
Saturn.
So it's an illustration of what the Shastra is saying that way. And I've seen it be true over and over again. All right. So now I want to bring up this chart.
Mark, this person's eighth lord is aspecting the ninth house. So would that be 8-9 connection, though it's a house aspect connection? Would you consider that?
Say this again. Oh, you mean Mars is the eighth lord aspecting onto the ninth house?
Thank you.
Yeah, well, it does give a 8-9 connection, and his original involvement in sort of turning to the east, as the phrase that I used, may very well have come in the Mars major period. I didn't know him then, but I do know that before I met him, which would have been like 2004 or whatever, I think for some time he'd already been involved in spiritual traditions of the East, so could very well be. And so I appreciate you pointing that out.
Mark, another point which I've seen is 9-8 connection. At least I've seen it in Yogananda also because I'm part of SRF. He has a 9-8 connection. His ninth lord is in the eighth house, and he also was doing he preaches Christianity and also Hinduism both together. Both go hand in hand. And that's one thing, even in my chart, I've observed is I'm open to other religions too. I've done Reiki, I go to churches, I've done Sufi meditations. So sometimes a 9-8 connection sometimes also can give you diversity, multiplicity of, I don't know, I mean, there's two cases, but
Yeah,
sometimes it's quite.
very possibly, very possibly. Something to be further explored. The chart I'm showing now is a woman who's had, as I'm going to describe, a rather unique destiny this way, or unique karma. And let me pull it up. So first of all, what would be the indication that this person would just be religiously inclined, spiritually inclined? What would very obviously show that?
Lagna Lord in the ninth with the ninth Lord.
Lagna Lord, Mercury in the ninth with the ninth Lord. Strong Jupiter, influencing the ascendant. But again, this is a person born in the U.S., American woman, raised in a typical sort of Protestant Christian household, but then very much has gotten involved in the Sanatana Dharma in just about every way you can think of it. Now, in particular, and this is what makes her somewhat unique, she has learned to do really elaborate both pujas and homas, yagas, the Vedic fire ceremonies. And quite unusually, there's a place called the Mount Madonna Retreat Center in Northern California. The resident guru is this man, Baba Haridas, who practiced Mauna silence. And there's a beautiful Hanuman temple there. I've gone there regularly. And, that society there is very open to women becoming pujaris, which of course is not something that happens in India. And on the weeks, a lot of the Hindu or the Indian population from nearby San Jose comes to there, and they were astonished to see this American white woman in the temple performing pujas, which she does beautifully. And so you see this now, where again is the indication based on what was brought out in the article that this person could adopt a foreign vidya. Mhm.
conjunction of the ninth lord and the 12th lord.
That's it.
And also, this is a Srinatha yoga, isn't it? Or is it
Yeah,
Srinatha?
absolutely, Angus. It's a very nice. In fact, think about this, folks. So those three yogas, each related to one of the aspects of the divine,
It's
Brahma,
all three.
all three: sun, moon, and the ascendant. Jupiter, Saturn, and the fifth lord. Mercury, Venus, and the ninth lord. And then strength of planets. Obviously, Venus is the ninth lord, strong in its own sign. Saturn, the fifth lord, strong in its own sign. And then see this combination from the moon in Taurus. What does it become?
Fifth lord in fifth house, ninth lord in fifth house.
Right. So all of this has come out for her in her Saturn major period, part of the Srinatha Yoga. So Saturn here is in its own sign, retrograde, potential source of strength. What's going on between Saturn and Mercury in the Vamsh?
There is an exchange
Exchange.
between Saturn and Mercury.
So again, source of strength for both planets involved in these, spiritual combinations. But it's this her being involved in doing these religious rituals that come from the Sanatana Dharma tradition that is really somewhat unique. And actually performing those rituals in, bona fide sort of Hindu temples, you might say. Now, in this case, this is where examination of D20 would be good to look at here. Again, is the Vimshamsha ascendant Libra? Potentially, is it, Scorpio there? This has all been happening in the Saturn major period. If it is Libra, of course, Saturn would be the fifth lord there. Mercury, the ninth lord, would go to the fifth under the influence of Rahu and Ketu. So this has all been happening during this time, but she's someone who is very involved in doing the spiritual rituals that come from this, spiritual tradition of India. Very, very interesting case in that way.
Is it the fifth house that is for yagyas?
Well, again, more ninth house are the rituals. But see, those rituals always involve, extensive use of stotras, of mantras, of chanting of mantras and so on and so forth. So that's always a part of it. And so you'll see, the activation of this way, both, Mercury, or, you've got this combination in the ninth, but then this combination all falls in the fifth from Saturn. Saturn's, well, just enough to say about that.
Mark, interestingly, this nine word Venus and Mercury is in the Kritika nakshatra, and Kritika is Agni is the Devata, and all these fire rituals. Agni is a very important deity in this. So it's interesting to mention to see she's doing exactly that kind of rituals. Yes.
Very, very, very good.
Kritika, Agni.
Very, very good observation, the fire ceremonies, right? And I've been in attendance while she does these. She's involved. She's with a partner. They're not married, but they're very much a committed relationship. She's partnering with a man who she does all this with, and in their home, they have a home which they call the Peace House. It's kind of like a spiritual center where they hold events. And in the back, they have a Vedic fire pit, and they do on the full moon. They typically do a homa, and a pretty elaborate one. And I've been in attendance there, and you see them doing this together. All right. So now I want to pull up. I kind of didn't include this in the article. I could have, but I'm going to pull up the chart of a public figure, someone everyone should be familiar with. Tom Hanks. And to make a point in particular, obviously a very famous, very successful movie star, maybe considered the greatest actor of our time, multiple Academy Award winning person. And he had an interesting history. In fact, let me pull up my note here. So Tom Hanks was born into a Catholic family that then became Mormon. He went from that to being a born-again Christian, and then to marry his wife Rita, he converted to Greek Orthodox. So he's had this sort of progression. Now, again, that's none of that's sort of necessarily adapted so much of a foreign Vidya, but he's been very involved in religion and is a religious person. One journalist I came across characterized Hank's teenage self as being a Bible-toting evangelical person. That was kind of the born again Christian phase, right? Let me bring the chart back up here. Now, if you look at his ninth lord, now, well, first of all, he's got Jupiter strong in the ascendant, right? Giving directional strength, which by itself could make you inclined towards religion, being a religious person. It's actually in a mutual glance with Mars, the ninth lord, right? And ninth lord has what source of strength here?
Exchange.
Well, it has an exchange with Saturn, right? So giving both of those, I'm going to get the Vamsha back up, or giving both of those a strength. But the reason, I highlight this is that, neither Jupiter or Mars seem to be under the influence of Rahu or Ketu in the way in which we've talked about it thus far. But you've all should be aware of my views, not just my views, but the view that planets that are in angles from each other do in fact influence each other. It's a type of sambandha, a type of connection. And again, this just isn't my idea. In the article I wrote about this called Intimate Connections, I quoted passages from Paladipika where it talks about the 4 ways in which planets can be connected, one of those ways being through Kendra Sambandha. In which case, if you take Kendra Sambandha, then both Mars, the ninth lord, and Jupiter, the Karaka, would be, in fact, under the influence of the Rahu-Ketu axis in this way. And the reason, well, when I first looked at this chart and saw that, his enormous success beginning earlier in his career as an actor was in his Venus major period. And of course, Venus as a planet Swakshetra as the third lord in the 10th, it's no big surprise that, he could be acting at this time and making a career of it. But where's the Raja Yoga, right? That to bring the great success, and particularly in Venus Saturn, where he became the only actor ever to win 2 years in a row, back-to-back Oscars for Best Actor. This happened in Venus Saturn. Now, see this combination from the birth lagna, see this combination from the moon. Really not forming any substantial Raja Yoga. But if you take all of these planets as being connected through Kendra Sambandha, multiple angle trine combinations form. Jupiter is both the 5th lord and Mars is the 9th lord. Venus, of course, is the strong 10th lord. Saturn's another angle lord, the 7th, right? And from Dasha Lagna, what kind of planet does Saturn become?
Yoga Karaka.
Yoga Karaka. So, you've all heard me say that if you really want to progress in Jyotish, work on charts. And what that means is, take reliable birth times, work on charts, see what happened in a person's life and the timing of that, and ask yourself the question, by what principles of Jyotish was that predictable? How could that be seen? And this working on this chart, which is a chart I worked on very early on in my study of Jyotish, really taught me a lot about that. And both in terms of this idea of Kendra Sambandha, the way in which planets can be connected and therefore form yogas in that way, but also the idea of Dasha Lagna, that, Venus Saturn then became such a hugely successful period for him. So, and the reason, go ahead, somebody had a comment.
Mark, if you see his Karakamsha Lagna, you see the Gemini aspects, Virgo becomes the Karakamsha Lagna, and then you see what happens to the 9th, 10th house from the Karakamsha, there's the,
Virgo becomes
Mercury.
Mercury. Well, are you talking about Virgo as the Karakamsha Lagna?
Yeah, Virgo is a Karakamsha
Yeah,
Lagna. Then
so
Mercury in the 10th, that it's like the Macron combination, really very good. And then Venus and, 9, 10, it's a big Raja.
correct.
Kendra, the Raja Yoga, yeah.
Well, it's Venus is the ninth under the influence of the Rahu Ketu axis. So
And 10th, and 10th, yeah. So I mean, it's not the religion change, sorry, but I meant the success, his success.
no, I understand what you're saying. You're
Yeah.
referring to that Jaimini Sutra that says when a strong Mercury or Sun is in the 10th house from the Karakamsha Lagna, the person is very successful in their line.
Yeah.
But if you want to see the static potential for potential religious change as well, then Venus is the ninth or the ninth with Ketu from there fits that bill also. So good
That's true. Yeah.
good thing to highlight. All right. So I wanted to share that because when I looked at my own, obviously I was raised Catholic, as I also said in the article. I didn't actually show my chart in the article, but I'm someone who obviously adapted a foreign vidya and did so fairly early in life. It would have been my early 20s. I studied Buddhism as an undergraduate and then, got involved in yoga and the spiritual tradition of India in that way. And, obviously I'm looking at my own chart in terms of, okay, how does this show? And, come back to this idea of the way in which, Kendra Sambandha is a way in which planets influence each other. So you could see Venus as the ninth lord in the ninth in a Kendra Sambandha with Rahu. But, you've all seen my chart probably too often. What way is there also a connection between 9 and 12?
Sukshma Parivartana Yoga.
Correct. So
Venus is in Moon's Rohini and Moon, yeah.
right. So Venus is in the Moon's nakshatra. Moon goes to the 12th. The Moon is in Venus's nakshatra, goes to the 9th. So the connection comes about in that way. But this actually took place, initially anyway, in my Mars major period when I met my first guru from the Kriya lineage, Goswami Kriyananda. Joined after graduating from college. I was participating in a 2-year study program with him, where I first was exposed to the teachings, say, of the Bhagavad Gita and the Yoga Sutras and so on. This was all happening in Mars. To understand that, you have to see, again, more Mars from Chandra Lagna and it falling in Ketu's nakshatra, right? So these are, let's see, what else have I got here? Right. So let me pull up this chart also. This would be another public figure unless you grew up in the 60s like me, you probably wouldn't recognize this person. This is a chart of a man named Elridge Cleaver, who first had public, you might say, notoriety when he was a member of what's called the Black Panther organization, which was a radical Black political organization actually espousing violence. That he got in a lot of trouble with the law and as a result of that time. But later in life, I'll pull up a note here, he got involved in religion, but then changed religions a number of times. Let me bring up my note about that. Again, so as an example, like Snoop Dogg that I gave in the article of more than one religious conversion. So initially, as a member of the Black Panthers, he got involved in the Nation of Islam, which of course is the Muslim Islamic tradition, then became an evangelical Christian, and then later converted to Mormonism as late as December of 83. So again, this is a question of a person, adapting a a religion that comes from a different culture, different country from which he was raised. I don't think he had a particular religious background himself growing up. But many of the black families in the U.S. were very religious and were very church going. So I don't know that wasn't true. But what do we see here that is consistent with the parameters that we've talked about in terms of it, being involved in a foreign religion?
There's an aspect, Jupiter aspects K2.
Well, Jupiter does aspect K2, which can, again, incline a person towards spirituality at some point, for sure. K2 here, of course, is also Vargotama, but anything else that people see?
12th Lord Venus is an aspect with the 9th Lord Saturn. So
Right.
9, 12, there is the aspect.
Strong ninth house. Saturn has the ninth lord in the ninth, but it is in a mutual glance with Venus, who not only is the fifth lord, of course, but is also the 12th lord. So that is the 9-12 combination that we've been looking at. And but a lot of
It
this
repeats from the moon, Mark.
yes. So right. So the 9th lord now becomes Venus, goes to the 12th of the 12th lord. Good. I hadn't really noticed that before. A lot of this was happening in the Jupiter major period. We talked about I think the conversion to Mormonism took place in December of 1983, which would have been what? Would have been Jupiter, it's like Jupiter moon. And whose nakshatra is Jupiter in? It's in his own nakshatra, right? So who's the eighth lord here? Saturn is continuing to be the eighth lord. From a retrograde position, would you consider Saturn as the eighth lord aspecting then on to Karaka Jupiter? Maybe. Right?
And from Dasha Lagna Jupiter, the 9th Lord Mercury is in the 12th. From 12.
And who goes to the ninth house from Jupiter?
Yeah, Ketu. Yeah.
Ketu.
So
Good.
yeah, Dasha
Good.
Lagna.
So we know the way in which these things can show up from different perspectives. So this is what I had to share with you today. Anyway, so good being with you all. Love our discussion, and we will finish as we normally do with our Sanskrit prayer. Ahom asatoma sadgamaya, tamasoma jogtir gamaya, mrityorma mritam gamaya, sarvesham swasti bhavatu, sarvesham shanti bhavatu, sarvesham mangalam bhavatu, loka samasta sukhino bhavantu, ahom shanti, 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 hari om tat sat. Be well, everyone. Take care. Namaste. See you all the next time. Bye for now.